Hello, everyone. This is Natasha. Today I will be the host of today's webinar titled Circular Economy in the Tourism Sector. Before I open this webinar, I would like to introduce you with few important details that I consider very important for today. Few details about NDPI. We are a pioneer in scholarly open access publishing. And the NDPI has supported academic communities since 1996, based in Basel, Switzerland. NDPI has the mission to foster open scientific exchange in all forms across all the disciplines. Our 472 diverse and open access journals, including 463 peer-reviewed journals and 9 conference journals, are supported by more than 295,000 academic experts who share our mission, values, and commitment to providing high-quality service for all authors. And few details about the Sustainability Journal. We are international, peer-review, open access journal on environmental, cultural, economic, and social sustainability of human beings, published semi-monthly online by NDPI. Today's program will look like it is shown on screen. Our chair will give a brief introduction. That's Professor Dr. Alfonso Vargas-Sánchez. Then we will have our speakers. First one, Dr. Lucia Tomasini, Dr. Flemming Sorensen, Dr. Francesca Nocca, and Dr. Martina Bossone. After all presentations are done, we will have brief Q&A session for 15 minutes, and we will read all the questions you have asked during this webinar. And after Q&A is done, our chair, Dr. Vargas-Sánchez, will close the webinar. I would also like to remind you that in case you have any questions during whole webinar, you may use Q&A option, Q&A box, which is located between participants and pools. And be free to write the name of a speaker that you would like to ask a question. And I'm very honored to introduce you our today's webinar chair. That's Dr. Alfonso Vargas-Sánchez from Andalusian Academy of Regional Science, Spain, and also from University of Algarve from Portugal. Our first speaker will be Dr. Lucia Tomasini from Hotel Management School, Leeuwarden, Netherlands. Dr. Flemming Sorensen from Department of Social Science and Businesses at Roskilde University, Denmark. Dr. Francesca Nocca from Department of Architecture, University of Naples Federico II from Italy. And Dr. Martina Bossone from the same Department of Architecture from University of Naples. And before I give the word to our webinar's chair, I would like to remind you all that this webinar will be fully recorded and available online as soon as possible.
So thank you very much, Natasha, for your kind introduction. So I have to say thank you to the Sustainability Journal for the opportunity to organize and chair this webinar. This webinar about one of the hottest topics today in academia within the tourist industry. So obviously the application of circular economy principles to the tourist sector. I'm not going to repeat what is available in the webinar webpage with all the details about our speakers, their CVs, the title of their presentations, and so on. It's available. All of the participants know that. By the way, my greetings also to the participants that are with us today. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Just I would like to say, to be respectful with the available time, that the rationale was to join different experts from different countries with a strong research background in this field of the application of circular economy in the tourist industry, and this is why our 4 presenters were invited. So I have to say to all of them, thank you for their availability. They immediately accept the invitation to be here, sharing their knowledge about this exciting topic. This is why we have Lucia Tomasini from the Netherlands, Fleming Sorensen from Denmark, and Francesca Noca and Martina Bosone from Italy. All of them with different backgrounds. They can complement each other. This is the basic idea that I followed when I received the invitation to organize this webinar. So I think as an introduction is enough. In my final remarks, I would like to summarize some important ideas, perhaps to present more in details the whole rationale of the webinar in terms of its content. And the most important thing is to listen to our speakers. This is why I give the floor to the first one, which is our dear colleague, Lucia Tomasini. So Lucia, please, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me. So first of all, let me share. Thank you. So this is just the title and where I work and my affiliation. So I will go directly to the second slides, where my contribution today will be about, well, introducing shortly myself, about which are my line of research and why I'm here as a keynote speaker, and then going through a bit of introduction and background of circular economy, and presenting you basically a research letter that I co-authored with other colleagues. One is actually here, Fleming, so is part of this output. Anyway, so presenting this conceptual framework and then going through our conclusions. So starting from myself, well, actually, this is, well, you can guess by my name and accent, I'm originally Italian, even if I work and live in the Netherlands. And I share actually a similar background to the other keynote speaker here today, since my background is in architecture and urban planning, then with a master in urban development and reconstruction. But then at a certain point after after my master, I, so to say, focused more in tourism and hospitality sector with a PhD on tourism, leisure, and events. And that led me to this type of position here in the Netherlands, where I'm basically a senior research lecturer, and my main research line is the one of circular economy in tourism and hospitality. I started working in this field 6 years ago. Together I have also other research interests, but let's say this is the main one, the official one, and I'm actually together with other colleagues. I'm the co-founder of a special interest group within Atlas. It's a bit of promotion of our group. Since maybe you know, Atlas is a network, is an association for tourism and leisure research, and basically special interest group is a way of, let's say, bring together researcher or students or practitioners interested in a certain field. So together with a colleague of mine, I coordinate this one in circular economy. So feel free to join, feel free to have a look in the web of this group. Seems exactly with the establishment of this group, actually a number of things follow up, among which the type of outputs or research that I would like to share with you today. I beg your pardon, since we work in an open space type of context, and so you may hear some background noise. Hopefully not, but if so, let me know, since I choose one of the most quiet spots that I could, but let's see. Bit of Marfilo, maybe I will have someone talking and walking beside me. Anyway, having said that, oh, sorry, would like to move the other slide. No. Sorry. Okay. So, well, we are here today to discuss, or the core topic of this webinar is circular economy in tourism and hospitality. And I'm sure that all the participants here, maybe they are research active in this field, or they have at least an interest in this field. And so I will not repeat things that are already known to some extent. Since overall circular economy is not a new paradigm, is not a new concept. I mean, in the meaning that was something already theorized in the 70s as a cradle to cradle, as a paradigm and a regenerative process that could mimic natural cycles. As you can see in the images that I put here, I mean, the carbon cycle, or there is also circularities, and this idea of an enduring equilibrium or a pattern that doesn't have a beginning and an end is not only an aspect that we can, so to say, witness and see in nature, but is also a way in which human beings has made sense of a number of things. I mean, time, the circularity of time, the circularity of seasons, and also if you think many rituals and praying process as an aspect of circularity. So circularity is also a principle of order. And when we try to bring this circularity into an economic system, I mean, so far, the majority of the research, at least at my best knowledge, has been mainly developed in what is some more a product-oriented type of industries. So, I mean, we can envision regenerative process or this cradle-to-cradle model more easily when we speak about materials. I mean, plastic material or any type of material that can be regenerated or upcycled. And here it brings to, say, the research gap, or where still, I mean, largely anti-horizon and under-research. I mean, what's about circularity in tourism and hospitality in an industry or sector that is mainly people-oriented, is made of product as well, but overall it implies mobility, it implies people, it implies services. So, I mean, how we can look at this type of paradigm when it comes to this sector, which is also multidisciplinary in itself. Having said that, is also something to be acknowledged that circular economy is gaining, so to say, more and more attention when it comes to the political agenda, institutional agenda. I mean, there is an European action plan. Circular economy is in a number of national agenda. For instance, here in the Netherlands is part of the government agenda, I mean, fostering circularity. And a regional and national level, United Nations recognized circularity as a best practice for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So, I mean, it's a paradigm that has been investigated for quite a long time in certain types of industry and sector, less in tourism and hospitality, despite its growing, so to say, or the growing level of interest it is raising. So the aim of today is to share with you this type of interdisciplinary approach or framework that is at the core of this publication, which is a research letter. I put the reference here below. Is this research letter, and so the presentation of today, is a way to unpack circular economy in tourism and hospitality, how we can, so to say, approach the study of it, and which could be an interdisciplinary framework for that combines micro, meso, and macro levels. So I move on. So this conceptual framework is grounded in what I introduced so far. So this lack of, let's say, it's being a subject that overall is under-investigated and under-researched. And it's probably require different theoretical lenses when we look at circular economy in tourism and hospitality than when we look at circular economy in, I don't know, product-oriented type of sector. So in this research letter that I co-authored, I was the leading author, but with the support of a really excellent group of colleagues. One is Fleming, which is here. The other are Professor Rodolfo Baggio, Professor Joanna Farsari, Professor Elena Cavagnaro, which are also kind of core group of this special interest group that we have within Atlas. So basically, in this research letter, we were trying to look at circular economy by combining different dimensions, how we can look at circular economy through a micro, meso, macro approach. So from the micro level of practices at individual level, the meso level of networks, and the macro level of complexity and systemic type of changes or systems. And in unpacking and looking at circularity through these different, let's say, levels, I mean, for each level, a different theoretical lens can be used, or has been used, at least in this publication. So the micro level, the individual level is practice theory, the meso level is network theory, the macro level is complexity theory, and overall there is this idea that when we look at circular economy, we have to embrace, especially when we look at circular economy within tourism and hospitality, we have to acknowledge the spatial turn and the mobility turn of the social sciences, in which basically a space in which circularity or circular regenerative process can happen is not just a physical space, but is a sociological space made of relationship, made of mobility, made of, let's say, connections. So it's not a box or a surface, but it's kind of an eventful type of space. And this is a bit the conceptual framework that we're going to look at. So when we look at the first level, the micro level, that is, so to say, the level of the individual, we look at, let's say, what circularity means, or how we can look at circularity or circular economy in terms of regenerative process when it comes to habit, when it comes to behavior, when it comes to pattern of consumption and production that are enacted by tourists and by all the actors, connected to the value chain. So it could be also a supplier. So, how the practices embedded in certain types of behavior and habits may support or block or challenge the shift to a circular economy paradigm. Seems when we exact is not just about maybe the reusal of an item, but is also the types of choice made in a destination, the types of offer made in a destination, and how this resonate with what we are used to do, and how this type of behavior and habit can be, so to say, challenged, can be changed, can be shifted. So, so it's looking at this micro level in terms of habit and practices. And the way of looking or prompting changes at that level, for sure, one of the possibilities through nudges. So looking at behavioral intervention, education, but how this habit can be shifted. Seems, we all do what we're used to do. So, shifting in something else require, let's say, a change in habits and a different way of acting or making decision. When we look at the meso level, so the level is a level of network. So when we look at tourism is for sure, is the individual tourist or provider, but they all come together in a type of networked system. Tourism in itself is a network system made of, let's say, supplier, made of travelers, and so it's a kind of chain of different dynamic networks. Tourism is not something static, as we all know. And so this idea of a network theory in which we can look at hubs and movement networks and type of dynamics, flows, allows to look at circularity and also doing reasoning about which aspects of circularity are possible within this network. Since circularity can be defined in terms of a generative process, cradle to cradle, but how does it work in a dynamic network that imply mobility of people, good, information, capital? And so some of the research in this line has revolved around methodologies. We look at circularity in terms of input and output. When we think on circularity, circularity applied to a destination, applied to an hotel or a facility. There are really, actually, as far as I know, and maybe you can prove me wrong, but there are really no studies about which are the input and outputs within an hotel. Which is, seems we can also the desire or the liminal concept of circularity most of the time don't take into consideration the mobility of the goods. If our suppliers or our products in a hotel or a restaurant comes from another countries on another side of the world, already the chances of being circular is highly reduced. So, looking at the input and output in terms of what's in a system that can be exactly an hotel, a facility, or also a destination is an interesting lens to make some further reflection on what can actually become circular and to which extent. All knowing that overall tourism and hospitality imply the movement of people. And as such, the chances of being zero impact is highly reduced. So it's also kind of, I would imagine a deeper research or reflection about what circularity can mean in a system that is basically embedded in mobility. and not carbon neutral mobility. So, okay, we have looked at the micro level of individual and the practices, habits, and then we moved to the meso level of networks. So these dynamic networks that are at the basis of tourism hospitality sectors. And then we move to the macro level of, let's say, complex system. I mean, when we look at tourism, overall is a complex adaptive system. So I mean, and circularity within tourism can be investigated, or this is a possible line of looking at it as exactly this dynamic, complex, adaptive system that basically require feedback loops, resilience and adaptation. We have all experienced this type of complex adaptive approach in tourism hospitality in connection to the geopolitical situation, in connection to the pandemic that we all experienced. So it's a really fluid, adaptive sector. And as such, tourism and looking at tourism from the complexity theory and what circularity can be within tourism in consideration of through the lens of complexity theory is an interesting approach, or promising approach, let's say, or a possible one, let's put it in this way. So, it's about regenerative, transformative models which can work in exactly through feedback loops and through, well, a dynamic adaptation. It is also a bit the idea of circularity, having this perduring dynamic equilibrium, which is not a linear path, is not beginning and a end. And to have a perduring continuum equilibrium, requires some level of adaptation, resilience, transformative approaches. Still, of course, we are discussing this. Is this, the head in mind of this presentation and overall of this research letter is a conceptual framework. So I'm still have to admit that we are still operating or discussing it in a theoretical level, and the big, let's say, challenge will be then how this can bring back to practice, to also kind of more empirical type of study. But yeah, this is, let's say, for future research, or this is the head in mind after that. After having presented this 3 level, something that is actually also, as you can imagine, more connected to my background and previous line of research, but this is this idea that when we look at tourism hospitality and the idea of a circular economy that can be enacted or applied within tourism hospitality, we have to acknowledge or take into consideration the space in which this circularity or circular regenerative process can happen or should happen. And as such, space, drawing on the space theory of Doreen Massey, but in general of the last couple of decades about studies on mobilities and spatial theories about space being not just a physical space, but being a space that is, so to say, constituted by relationship, by political dimension. So it's not just a physical space, but it's also a sociological space. And actually, sorry, here I see a typo in my first line of the presentation. Seems that was exactly, anyway. But so when we look at circular economy in tourism hospitality, we have to reflect on which type of space we are considering, how we are seeing this space, not just a surface, not just a box, but so to say, an eventful space where dynamics happen, when connection happen. And if you think on, for instance, stakeholder, supplier, it's not just about having them shipping a product or transit on a space, but which type of actually relationship and which type of connection they have with each other. And circularity would require most likely disrupt the way in which a number of supply chain or value chain has worked so far. Seems would been embracing much deeper complexity. So when we look at circularity in the space, physical and sociological space of tourism hospitality, we have to acknowledge that circularity or circular practices or circular economy, can emerge through, so to say, localized type of network and practices. So, circular economy, at least in let's say, in my understanding so far, is something that can go, but it's required for sure a policy dimension, but it's a bit bottom-up process in which we have to understand the system from, let's say, more so to say, localized type of context, a bit of this input and output aspects, or what can be circularity in a certain territory, in a certain region, and then scale it up and see where are the bottleneck and possibly solving it. But so there is no reasoning on circular economy if we don't consider the space in which it happens and which type of mobility aspects are embedded in this space. And this is exactly part of this reflection of this conceptual model to look at circularity in tourism and hospitality. So heading to our conclusion, the idea of this conceptual framework to prompt further research on circularity, circular economy, is that we have to unpack circular economy in a so to say, through an approach that is interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and requires, so to say, multi-level way of thinking. I mean, since it's not just one, I don't say, one paradigm that can be applied in a, I don't know, in a more black and white way, but we have to, as was presented in this presentation, I mean, the micro level, the meso level, the macro level, I mean, can be this a way to examine, to unpack, to problematize circular economy and what actually can become circular and what cannot. So for sure, when it comes to the future research direction, will be interesting moving to the empirical side of this framework, see what can be exactly what can be done. I mean, in terms of data collection, I mean, basically bridging theory to practice, and then, I mean, maybe starting from regional case studies or more localized case study, and overall is this interdisciplinary approach that I think is highly needed in general in tourism and hospitality, but especially when we want to look at circular economy within it. And with that, I'm at the end of the presentation. I hope I was good with the timing. And I understand that the questions and comments will be for the end. So yeah, ignore this slide and I stop the sharing.
So thank you, Lucia. It was perfect. That's on time. Thank you very much for your presentation with a lot of interesting ideas. Hopefully, we will have the chance to comment at least a few of them in the last section of Q&As. So at this point, let me introduce our second speaker, Dr. Flemming Sørensen. He works for the Department of Social Sciences and Business at Roskilde University in Denmark. Hopefully the pronunciation of the university was more or less okay, Flemming. So again, thank you very much for accepting the invitation to be here with us, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and the pronunciation was just perfect. I am going to talk about innovation towards circular economy in tourism, and I'm going to dive into one of the themes that Lucia was talking about just before, the practice theory part. So you can say the purpose of this presentation is to discuss the role of practices in the transition towards circular economy in tourism, and I'll do that based on a combination of innovation, circular economy, and practice theory. And I have to say that my presentation is quite theory and concept heavy. There's no empirical data in it. Also, it is based on both prior and ongoing research. And some of that research is still only sort of in the speculative phase. So I'm very open to comments, constructive comments on how to proceed with some of this work. The presentation is kind of split in two. I'm first going to present the framework for transitions towards circular economy and tourism that kind of leads up to a discussion of what kind of innovations are relevant for circular economy transformations in tourism. And then to the second part of the project, or of the presentation, where I talk about the practices, the relevance of looking at practices for this transition, you could say, to circular economy. First, I'm not going to say much about this slide because Lucia just also introduced circular economy. One thing just to mention now, because it's relevant later on in my presentation, is the idea of the 4 R's in circular economy, the idea of reducing, reusing, recycling, and recovering resources. And I know that some have expanded that to 7, to 8, to 9 R's, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll stick to the 4 R's here. And of course, circular economy is relevant in tourism. Lucia always mentioned it because it consumes land, energy, water, food, fuel, and other resources. It leaves behind it a mess, and it consumes also, and I think perhaps that is something that we're going to hear in the last presentation, that is actually also consuming culture and social aspects of communities. So highly relevant for tourism is circular economy. Now, if we look at we had the 4 R's before, and here I'm going to introduce what I suggest could be the 4 I's of circular economy in tourism. Those are different types of activities that support a transition towards circular economy in tourism. First, we have tourism organizations can develop and implement circular economy-based products and services. This is something that goes on internally in companies as well in their value chains. Tourists then play an important role. Lucia already mentioned that in the way they choose and interact with different services in tourism. Then, because the tourism experiences consist of a chain of different services and products, tourism organizations are also capable of combining these different types of services and products in ways that we make kind of total tourism products that consists of services and products that are geared towards the circular economy. And finally, we see in modern tourism today, we see actually the residents are a very important player in tourism, and therefore they are also an important player when we talk of a transition towards circular economy. And it's because, most evidently because of the sharing economy, that they have become active players. They have become active sort of producers and service providers in tourism. So the 4 I's that I suggest here is the implement, interact, integrate, and involve. The implementation of new products and services in companies, the interaction of tourists with different services and products, residents, and so on, the integration of different services and products into total tourism experiences, and then the involvement of residents in tourism as well. So we have 4 R's and we have 4 I's. When we combine them, we get this thing, the SERI framework, I call it so far, consisting of 16 fields of action. So, for example, companies can implement new products and services in order to reduce, reuse, recycle, or recover resources. And the same with the tourists, they can interact in order to reduce, reuse, recycle, or recover resources. So basically, we have 16 fields of actions here. And this is thought of as kind of a framework that you can sit down in a network or destination, then you can see what can you do in all these different fields of actions in our destination in order to build a circular economy of tourism in our destination or in a country or whatever it might be. I have a long list of actions for each of these 16 fields of actions, but here are just some examples. For example, in relation to reduce, companies can implement renewable energy sources. Tourists can interact to choose and use public transport or the low emission means of travel to from destinations, and so on. What becomes interesting then, or interesting an observation at least, is that these solutions towards circular economy in tourism, they can be both technological, or they can also be behavioral. And the behavioral innovations or solutions are equally important. And you can say, if we want a true transition towards circular economy, that might require initiatives in the entire framework here, in all of the 16 fields of action. So this is kind of the first. I'll get back to this framework when I now talk of practices. But But the next thing I'll do is to talk about how we can perceive innovation towards circular economy from a practice perspective, and then how it can be filled into to the model here. But just a very brief introduction to practice theory. Practice theory has practices as the unit of analysis, and it actually kind of argues that practice theory is a flat ontology. So no matter what level we are observing the world at, if it's at the very local micro level, or if it's at the macro level, we can keep the focus on practices, so that there are no different levels, that the practice theory is not focused on either necessarily a micro, meso, or macro level, kind of covers it all. Practices are by practice theory typically defined as common and routinized doings, activities, and it's related to how those practices are related to how bodies are moved, objects handled, and subjects treated. So it means there's this also material element in it, that most practices are related to what we do in relation to materials, whether they are technologies or other human beings. So while practices are common and routinized, what is mainly interesting when we talk of practices is also the dynamism of practices. That is not how they remain stable, but how they develop over time, and the reasons for such development. And there are different models for this, but they're actually all very similar. But a simple one says that practices are determined by different constituent elements of practices, including image, skills, and material. So image refers to the symbolic meaning of things that we do. Skills refer to the knowledge and competences that we have concerning what we do, and then the material refer to the material that is needed to do what we do. So practices can change. For example, tourist practices can change if the image of being a tourist changes, for example, from hedonism to sustainability, or when our skills about how to be a sustainable tourist develop, and of course when the material conditions for being a sustainable tourist also are put in place. So that was the basic idea of practice theory and the way I'm using it here and now. Now, practices and innovation then. There's actually not much research done on the relation of practices and innovation, and particularly not in tourism, if any. I'm not sure there is. But what I'm going to do now is to think of practices in 3 different ways in relation to innovation: as practices of innovation, and practices as innovation, then finally innovation in practice. And the last one hints at how practice is actually goes on, how innovation actually goes on in practice. So the first one, practices of innovation, and in this respect, with the focus of this presentation, the practices of circular economy innovation, it refers to the practices that are associated with the innovation processes in tourism companies. So, for example, the innovation process is from we conceive an idea until a product is launched on the market. There's a lot of activities going on in that process, and it can, in tourism in particular, but also other sectors, we can say that can happen in 2 opposite ways, you could say. There's one way is through strategically managed innovation processes, such as the stage gate model, new service development models, and so on, business modeling. And this type of strategically managed innovation process is typically related to strategic entrepreneurship, as we see it in, for example, large companies, multinational chains, where the focus is on profit maximization first of all. And in that case, practices in the line, you have a line of practices in the innovation process. They include strategizing, collecting market data, analyzing, prototyping, post-launch analysis, and so on. So a very strategic process. Then on the other hand, we have what we typically call bricolage or tinkering, which is kind of non-strategic process, you could say. It relies on intuition. It relies on making do with the resources at hand, and it relies on the individual entrepreneur's social capital. It is often related to the concept of entrepreneuring, which in compared to the strategic entrepreneurship is a type of entrepreneurship where the typical focus is not only and not necessarily primarily on economic profit, but also on other values like social values, cultural values, environmental values, and so on. And it's what we see, for example, typically among small-scale nature tourism entrepreneurs. The practices in this type of innovation includes observing, reflecting, mobilizing social capital, and so on. So these are kind of two extremes, the two opposites of how innovation occurs in tourism companies. It's particularly relevant in tourism companies because we have this wide variety of companies, from the large-scale multinational companies to a large forest of very small entrepreneurs with not necessarily much business background. And if we go back to the SERI framework from before, this type of innovation, the practices of innovation, is mainly relevant for implementing and integrating solutions in the SERI framework. So this is what goes on inside companies. Then if we look at practices as circular economy innovation, when we talk of practices as innovation, we think of innovation as changes in what people do. And in our case, it's the tourists. So it's not the development of new services or new products, but it's defined as what people actually do. So when we change what we do, it changes the phenomenological value of what we're doing, and then we can consider it an innovation, at least when it becomes something common, because it creates what service dominant logic talks of as real value. It's not the proposed value by the company, but it's the real value as it is experienced by the users, in our case, the tourists. So this exactly includes how tourists choose and combine products and services, how they use them, how they interact with services, employees, residents, environments, accessories, and so on. And it becomes related to this image of being a tourist. So if we are seeking hedonist pleasure when we're tourists, then we will perform a certain type of action, activities. If we're seeking to become sustainable tourists, we will probably change the practices. And this, in relation to the SERI framework from before, is mainly relevant for tourists' interaction and the residents' involvement in the framework. Though it can also be relevant, this innovation or practices as innovation can also be relevant when we look at employees and companies, for example. They can change practices in order to create a changed or more value for the tourists. This means that if we then say if we have these two types of innovation or types of innovation related to practices, we can then say, okay, how does it then really happen in tourism? First of all, when tourists, for example, interact with material and with residents, with services and products or accessories, there's either a direct interaction going on or there's an indirect interaction going on. So it's practices involving direct or indirect interactions. So we can say that there's always some kind of co-creation of value, because tourists do not act in an empty space. They're always doing it in relation to something. So the idea of co-creation of value becomes relevant. Now then, practice theory also talks of bundles of practices. One way of interpreting that is that we have a sequence of practices that are kind of logically connected. It also talks of constellations of practices or compound practices meaning that all our practices are somehow connected to what other people do, are connected to other people's practices, even in direct relations, but also in indirect relations. So this space of practices kind of becomes a very complex space of interdependent practices. So first of all, if we then look at the practices of innovation, those that are innovation processes in companies, then companies do not innovate on their own. They collaborate. They depend on others' practices in larger or smaller constellations. And if we look at practices as innovation, what tourists do, first of all, was what tourists do and how they create value. You can say that if, for example, I do something completely new, never seen before on my holiday, that is not necessarily an innovation. When we define innovations, they have to be repeated. They have to be kind of put into system in order to be considered innovation. And you can say the same with practices. One action, jumping out of a window, is not a practice. If it's only done once, it has to become a habit. It has to become common. It has to be something other tourists do as well. So there's some process going on here, making something common or making something a habit. And I suggest that that is something we could call a habitualization process. In innovation theory, we talk of diffusion of innovation, but it's not quite the same, because this is about something becoming a common thing to do. So something completely new in tourism, a new practice, can be kind of habitualized through employees telling others about the practice, observing the practice and communicating it to others. It can be through, for example, social media, where tourists communicate about their new experiences. But it can also be through practices of innovation in companies. As companies also observe tourists' practices, then they develop or improves the needed material for those practices. It distributes know-how about the practices and affects the image of those practices, for example, through marketing material. So in that case, the innovation as practice and innovation of practice combines and goes beyond, becomes something that goes way beyond co-creation. It becomes something that happens in either in smaller or larger practice constellations of a number of actors in interdependent practices. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to learn about innovation by looking at these habitualization processes and in those how that happens in constellations of practices. And that is, I got a little bit away from the circular economy, but this is extremely important, I think, when we talk of circular economy. Especially if we're talking about large-scale transformations or towards circular economy, because if we look at, for example, disruptive innovation in tourism, such as the sharing economy, say, has been that has relied on a high number of actors, private companies, tourists, residents, policymakers, and all these actors, practices playing together, facilitating this process of habitualization, involving a lot of different types of actors and their practices. So the question kind of becomes, is such a disruptive innovation through practice-based innovation possible in order to create a transformation towards circular economy in tourism? So this leads me towards sort of a conclusion, because if we look at circular economy, and if we look at it as a transformation, that we need to transform the system in order to become circular, then that is something that requires the change of practices in extremely large constellations of practices that transcends different sectors of the economy and that transcends different sectors of social life. Because tourism is a sector with a variety of products involved. It is a sector that uses all kinds of resources in the same way, basically, as we do in daily life. The same diversity of resources. It uses food, gas, water technologies, so on. You could continue. And it affects and requires not only changed tourist practices, but also involves local populations and their practices. So this kind of indicates that we're talking about a large share of the practices of social life that are kind of involved if we need a transformation towards circular economy in tourism. So the question is sort of, it's probably not the first time that has been raised, but with that, from that perspective, can tourism then be a driver of such a society level transformation towards a circular economy? Or is it something, will tourism be driven by a society level transformation so that it's not the driver, but it's just being drawn along as we change society to a circular economy? What you can say is if you think about the first one, can it be a driver of society level transformation? Then it requires not only new material, you could say, it requires not only new know-how in the tourism industry and among tourists, it also requires perhaps first of all a changed image of tourism. So while we may think of tourism as associated with pleasure, hedonism, it needs to be also associated with some sort of sustainability, that we are tourists because of sustainability, so that it becomes an integrated aspect of tourism. Otherwise, I don't think tourism will be the driver of such a transformation, but then hopefully it can be driven by a larger society level transformation. And then the last question is, of course, could the SERI framework at a more local scale perhaps be a step forward, because it kind of encompasses many different aspects, both the behavioral and the technological innovations. I have spent my time, so thank you for listening, staying with me in this kind of theoretical journey. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Dr. Sorensen. Thank you for being on time, and thank you for this practices and innovation-oriented presentation. Plenty of interesting ideas that perhaps later on we can make some comments on them. I think this is the right moment to remind our participants that they have the option to share their thoughts, comments, or questions in the specific box of questions and answers. Even they can use the chat if they prefer. So I will convey them to our speakers if necessary. So let's go to the last presentation. But let me explain a little bit why the seminar was organized in this way. When I received the invitation, when I was challenged to organize this webinar, of course, you can imagine that I am also a researcher in this field of circular economy, and this is why I propose this topic. And also because, honestly, it is one of the most important topics today in the field of tourism. I wanted to put into practice something we mention a lot, but we use very little, which is interdisciplinarity. So I am a business-oriented person, but I don't want to invite also business people. For example, Fleming works for a business department. Well, we share this background, but I wanted to invite people from other kind of backgrounds, such as Lucia Tomasini and our last speakers, Dr. Francesca Noca and Dr. Martina Bosone. Both of them work for the Department of Architecture of the University of Naples, Federico II, in Naples, in Italy. And, well, this is an opportunity to see the same topics, to address the same topic from different perspectives. So we're eager to listen to you, Francesca and Martina. You can distribute your time, more or less 20 minutes, in the way you want. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. And We are both researcher at the Department of Architecture at University of Federico II in Naples, Italy, and we are involved in a research project because we are researcher in estimation. So we are a specific sector of architecture, and we are developing a project about circular economy implementation model in the urban regeneration project with a specific focus on cultural heritage and on impacts in other sectors such as tourism. So our study aims to define an operational framework in terms of recommendation, action, and indicators for implementing our proposal for a human circular tourism model, and at the same time to support public authorities and other stakeholders in this sector in identifying efficient policies and strategies. This is just an overview of our presentation, which starts with the definition of circular tourism. Then we explain the international approach of a World Tourism Organization, assumed as a reference for elaborating our proposal about the human circular tourism implementation framework. And finally, we will focus on a specific stakeholder category in tourism sector, which is the local community, showing recommendation, actions, and indicators elaborated for it in a circular economy perspective, and highlighting also the relationships between it and travelers. Let's start with a brief theoretical clarification about the relationship between tourism and circular economy. Circular tourism is a tourism that transforms its processes from linear to circular. It limits impacts on environment and in which actors of tourism adopt an eco-friendly and responsible approach. But that's not all. As Lucia Tommasini said, and also other speakers of this morning, circular tourism has been approached from an interdisciplinary point of view, and it is not only a green tourism, but it regards also regeneration and knowledge of values, of multidimensional, tangible and intangible values involved. So other definitions of circular tourism are also connected to corporate social responsibility actions, responsible tourist travel, and in general with any measure that helps to save water, energy consumption, eco-friendly approach, and also social relational capital. Circular economy and its link with SDGs was also identified by World Tourism Organization as a strategy to recover the critical situation after COVID, and it is explained in one of the 23 identified actionable recommendations. The World Tourism Organization has developed a platform to highlight the relationship between the SDGs and tourist sector, identifying the different categories of actors involved in this sector. And the World Tourism Organization for each category proposes different recommendations, linking each of them to related SDGs. So the general aim of the proposed methodology is to improve existing World Tourism Organization recommendation and integrate them with new ones in a circular tourism perspective on the basis of official documents, reports, scientific paper, and case studies. But to make these recommendations really operational, we propose the human circular tourism implementation framework, in which we have identified also related actions and indicators to move towards a general evaluation framework to assess the transition toward the circular tourism. But why do we talk about human circular tourism and not simply circular tourism? Because in our proposal, the human being assumes a central role. They are at the center of the synergistic development model that integrates the economic, ecological, physical, and the socio-environmental system. This human circular model is linked not only to material flows and recycling, but also to the relational capital, incorporating the avoiding waste of human capital.
Yes, so in order to integrate the World Tourism Organization framework, putting a human being at the center of the framework, we also introduce another categories represented by the host community, and also, as Martina said before, we also introduce also recommendation, but also actions and multidimensional indicators in order to evaluate and monitor these actions and their impact in a multidimensional perspective. And also we have deduced these actions and also the proposed recommendation from a survey that we submitted to travelers. And that we also published in these two frameworks that we elaborated. One of these also with Professor Fusco Girarda and Professor De Toro about traveler categories, both about the interviews, but also about the recommendation, actions, and multidimensional indicator framework. This framework that we have proposed as an integration of the World Tourism Organization can represent, as also Martina said before, a support both to public authorities and other tourism stakeholders, such as tour operators, private bodies, and so on, in the identification of policies and also efficient human-centered strategies in the tourism sector. As I said before, we introduce a new categories in the World Tourism Organization framework, that is the local community, that represent the key stakeholder categories in the human circular tourism implementation. In order to identify recommendation, action, and indicators in the local community categories, we referred both to the travel framework that we have identified before, but also from a critical analysis of international documents by World Tourism Organization, but also from European Commission. And also, in order to make this framework operational, we also referred to the community-based tourism that represents an efficient strategies, an efficient approach for implementing the human circular tourism, emphasizing the key role of the host community. Because this model put the community at the center of the tourism planning, development, and management, and also it aims to increase and improve the quality of life of the community, and at the same time to produce economic benefits and protecting natural and cultural environment, also providing a high quality of visitor experiences. So it represents an efficient strategy to put human circular tourism in practice in the urban context. So starting from these documents that I said before and the traveler framework that is published in the previous paper, we have identified recommendation, actions, and indicators for the local community. And they are divided in these four categories: capacity building, prosper, safeguard, and collaborate and share. And these categories are strictly related and also cover all the sustainability dimensions, that is the environmental, economic, financial, social, and the cultural dimensions. So also in line with the interdisciplinary approach that also the other speaker highlighted before. We have elaborated a framework consisting of dimension, recommendation, action, indicator, and also unit of measure for the 4 categories that I said before. That is capacity building, prosper, safeguard, and collaborate and share. This is the first one about the capacity building category that refers to all the recommendations that aim to promote the involvement of the local community. The community, as I said before, play a key role in this framework because their active participation is able to ensure that the experiences offered to the tourists are authentic and reflect the local culture. For example, to this end, the community can participate in mentoring programs about community-based tourism implementation, or also, for example, participate in the design of community-based products and services. The other category is about Prosper, and it refers to recommendations on possible actions that the community can take to contribute to the local community, to the prosperity of the city. And they are referred to support locally made handcrafted products, for example, supporting markets that allow tourists to buy local handcrafts from local artisans directly, and also, for example, encouraging the purchase of second-hand products promotes more sustainable tourism, or participating in competitions for funds to develop initiatives for tourists strictly linked to the local culture. The other category is about safeguard, and it includes a recommendation aimed at empowering the local community to adopt behaviors to safeguard and valorize the cultural and the natural resources of tourist destinations that characterize the city soul. They are referred, for example, to the reduction of waste, adopting, for example, waste management systems. Ooh, sorry, there is the earthquake. So sorry.
What happened, Francesca?
I heard
There is
earthquake.
the earthquake. We are in Campigray. Sorry.
We hope you're fine. Do not worry at all.
Yes. It's okay. So sorry.
And it is totally fine if you would like to like stop your presentations.
No. It's okay. It seems everything is okay. So sorry.
You're fine. Thank you.
So discussing about safeguard categories. It can be related also, for example, to the reduction of the consumption of the non-renewable resources, but also, as I said before, to the necessity to be active, so to play an active role in the protection of natural and cultural environment. For example, participating in decision-making processes for identifying areas for which measures must be taken to address over-tourism that in some cases can damage the cultural and the natural resources of a city. The other category is related to the collaborate and sharing categories that refer to encourage local community to activate collaborative relationships with other tourism stakeholder categories. The recommendations are referred to contribute to the cultural and knowledge exchange, and the integration between tourists and the local community, and also to increase and improve joint activities between local communities and tourists. For example, in these categories, we can think about the organization of community dinners where tourists can enjoy traditional dishes prepared by community members, and also learn the stories behind these typical recipes, or offering local cooking classes where tourists can learn how to prepare the traditional and local dishes. They are also referred to the role that the community can have in decision-making processes, participating in these processes, for example, for identifying strategies and actions for sustainable management of the tourism sector. And also the active participation in the evaluation processes. For example, sharing data and collaborate in the data exchange with other actors and stakeholders of the tourism sectors, and also in the institutions, for evaluating and for monitoring the impacts that the organizing tourist activities have on the context, on the urban context, on the cities, and also on the community. These relationships are strictly in relationship with the other actions of the other categories. For example, the travelers' actions. There are the actions of these two categories, travelers and host community, are closely interwoven by both cause effect relationship and also collaborative relationship. Many actions of the travelers depend on the action of the host community, and also vice versa. Many action of the host community depends on the action of the travelers in a circular economy perspective. So this means that the success of one category's actions depend also on the actions of the other category, and thus the different stakeholders must act in synergies, in very strong relationship each other. And this relationship so do not concern only host community and host community and travelers, but all the categories that we have mentioned before in the stakeholder map of the human circular tourism. In conclusion, in order to implement the human circular tourism, we need to know, to involve, to evaluate, and to share and learn. Because we need to know and to understand the circular metabolism of the tourism, both from a tangible and from intangible point of view. We need to, this is important to transform the linear processes characterizing the tourism sector in circular processes. We need to involve all the stakeholders categories in order to implement the human circular tourism model, because they are in synergies, they need to be in synergies. We need also to evaluate and assess the impacts of these actions, going beyond the economic point of view. This is absolutely necessary, but not sufficient. We need to integrate the economic dimension with also the cultural, the social, and the environmental one. And also we need to evaluate in an iterative and interactive way, also in line with Tommasini said before, that because the tourism is a complex adaptive system, so it changes over time, and also the evaluation process need to be iterative and interactive and to follow this dynamic system. And also, at last, we need to share and learn, as we are also doing today. We need to share good but also bad practice, because we need to learn from these practices, also from the mistake. And we also to identify virtuous and replicable strategies and actions to make tourism more sustainable and circular. And in this perspective, digital platform can contribute to make this goal operational. And in this perspective, also the interaction between different stakeholders and the sharing of data and information is absolutely important for the implementation of the human circular tourism model. Okay, thank you. And sorry for our interruption.
No, thank you to you. Thank you to you both. Apparently, the Vesuvio volcano wanted to join us in our seminar, and hopefully this was an anecdote only. So, and then nothing serious
Yes,
happened.
sorry.
So I guess you can stay with us for a few minutes more. We have approximately 50 minutes for questions and answers. Well, I cannot see any specific question in our box or in our chat. So if I am wrong, please correct me, Natasha.
You're
Well,
right.
I think
Mm-hmm.
now there is a comment here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I think apparently, well, just well, I can read it for all of you. We are a group of 8 researchers who have joined the workshop. Thank you for your experience. We can also share our research sample on Latvia, where we have conducted an empirical study on the assessment of the circularity of the tourist system. Of course, all of us will be more than happy to know this particular experience in Latvia. So feel free to contact us if we can collaborate and we can share our knowledge about this topic. So at this point, and the chair has the role of acting as a icebreaker in some occasions. No? It seems that this is one of the occasions. I would like to share with you a couple of ideas, if we have enough time before my final remarks. Oh, let's see if there
We have one
is a
more
question here.
question.
We have a
Yes.
question.
Mhm.
Questions have priority. The question is, there are some tools to recommend to do the following of actions. I don't know exactly what the question is, but some specific, there are some tools to recommend. I don't know, perhaps if you, Francesca, or Martina, have some recommendation about the specific tools, or any of you, Fleming or Lucia.
Yes. To include the circular economy in tourism, we need to include indicators that are able to evaluate the circular processes, both from a material, tangible point of view, such as about energy and waste management, and for example about the 0-kilometer food and so on, but also from intangible and material point of view, because also the exchange of knowledge among host community and tourism is a circular process, because they have a reciprocal exchange of knowledge. So indicate in the framework that we proposed before, there are many indicators that are referred to these flows, the circular metabolism of flows, and also the number of projects that are referred to circular economy projects in the tourism sector is important, and I'm sure I can share my screen if you want. But also, for example, the participation in
cultural activities and all activities developed from local community. So we stressed a lot this point because in our perspective, this cultural exchange is possible only if we stimulate this kind of dialogue. So circularity, as said Francesca, not only in terms of material flows, energy flows, and waste management, but also in terms of relations between all the actors involved. Also in terms of responsibility and sensitivity about social and cultural projects in tourism sector from community point of view, not bottom up, not top down project, but bottom up project, little and middle.
There is a comment in the chat that can be addressed by the three of our speakers. The question is, what are some of the main indicators any of our speakers would suggest to include in exploring circular economy in tourism? If you can underline perhaps one or very few indicators with particular importance in your opinion.
Yes.
Can you start, Lucia?
Yes, I was thinking, I read the question in the chat, and to me, what comes to my mind, or I think would be a good starting point, looking at this idea of input and outputs. I mean, if you look, tourists, which aspects of tourism are we looking at? Destination is quite broad, but anyway, are we looking at a natural park, natural area, museum, and or let's say destination? Which are the input and output? Input could be, in terms of, visitors number, but also in terms of products arriving there for the sake of the tourist consumption, and which is type of output in terms of waste or any other types of output. So, in this idea of circularity as a zero impact dynamic equilibrium, input and output seems to me a good approach. I don't know if it's actually an indicator, but this was.
That's okay. Can you add something, Fleming, please?
I don't know if I can add something because I kind of agree. I would perhaps say that if you should mention one thing and an indicator, it should focus on the input, because that's where it all starts. The circularity starts with the inputs, that we use less resources, that we use non-toxic resources and resources that are also renewable. So I guess that is where it starts, and I think sometimes there's a tendency to focus not too much, of course, but to focus more on how to reuse things and refurbish things, and then perhaps forget a little bit about how much stuff we put into the system, especially considering that we are using many more resources every year than the world actually has to us for using. So I would say the inputs is, if I should mention one thing, inputs.
Excellent. And for you, Francesca and Martina, you have a long list of indicators. If you are asked to underline one or very few of them, what would you suggest?
Yes, so we can share the screen so we can show some indicators.
You have plenty of indicators, so.
Yes, from local community point of view, for example, in our perspective, it's very important the number of community members involved in activities which are able to promote local cultural heritage in terms of knowledge and also commons assets, cultural assets. So in which measure local community participate in the promotion of territory. Yes, and in terms of traveler, 2 or 3 main indicators are related, as Lucia Tommasini said also, about the consumption, the carbon footprint of tourists in a destination. So we focused on on consumption in terms of CO2 of tourist activities and waste produced by tourists in destinations. So these are the main issues of tourist sector from a circularity point of view.
Yes, also these indicators about collaboration and sharing, for example, establishing about the action of establishing dialogue, speaking with tourists, so the amount of community members declaring they want to speak with tourists and so on, represents a circular economy perspective from the intangible point of view, because there is an exchange between community and tourists. So also for example, the number of tourists participating in local social dinner, it is indirectly an indicator about the circular tourism, about the circular exchange of knowledge and culture between host community and tourists. And also, for example, the number of tourists sharing their skills with the local community through workshop and training, and the number of workshop and training about it organized, because, as I said before, they represent an aspect of the circular tourism implementation. So there are these two. Yes,
No, sorry, Francesca. No, I was
so
saying that.
there are these.
Please.